I would start my journey as just growing up as your average Shia Muslim. My mother is who I learned a lot from. My dad was busy working and providing for the family. My mom was extremely busy being religious and following Islam, and I was very isolated. I started to just deal with problems myself alone, not relying on my parents. I started to realize that there was something more that was going on in my family, because there would be a lot of people would trip up during events and weddings, and they would sort of say, oh, he is actually not these parents' son, he's actually this other person's son. And I'd be like, no, you're confused. I remember running to see my mom and going, Mom, this friend of mine's telling me that I'm adopted. And she's like, oh, go back to sleep. I'm like, no, he has too many details. And so she finally gets up, she goes to this closet, and she starts to flip this photo album. And it's got wedding pictures. Turns out I had a very close relationship with my uncle, okay? My mom's brother, and he died in a motorbike accident. And it's him and this other beautiful woman, but it turns out she was my birth mom, and she died giving birth to me. I was adopted by my aunt and uncle, okay? And so that was shocking. Everybody knew, the whole city knew that I was adopted except me. But what are you gonna do? Ultimately, thankfulness and gratefulness was the emotion that started to take hold of me. When I share how I met Jesus, this whole notion of being adopted made sense to me, okay? Because we've been adopted by God. And this notion of adoption is not very common in Islam. So 2 years later, after discovering my birth identity at 18, my parents sent me to University of Texas at Arlington. Oh boy, things went south really fast for me, because I think I'd been spoiled. I made all the mistakes that parents hope their young boys don't make when they go to college. And ultimately, it just spirals so far down that I essentially tried to end my life with a knife, and I slashed my wrist. Thankfully, if you're gonna do that, don't do it here, because it doesn't work here. And so off to the hospital, $800 later, I'm fine, but it was a wake-up call, and that was a low point in my life. At this point is when my life started to change, because I encountered the first true Christian. And her name was Judy. She was very positive. She had a joy about her. I decided I wanted to ask her out. And she wanted to get rid of me. And so she's like, how can I get rid of this, Muslim who's like constantly asking me out? She's like, how about you come to church with me? And she thought I was gonna say no. And I was like, sure, I'll go to church with you. And that's where was my first encounter with a Christian and going to a church. And we spent an extensive amount of time as friends just learning and asking questions. And on my birthday, she gives me this Bible. And so I do my own analysis. I'm studying the Quran, I'm studying the Bible, and I'm going to the library, and sure enough, for every book that says the Bible has some issues, there are 6 books showing the Bible is the most inerrant book in existence. And Judy and I have become pretty close. And at this point, her friend calls her, and she says, Judy, what are you doing? And she's like, what do you mean? She goes, you're dating a Muslim. And so she's like, no, I'm not. She's like, yeah, you kind of are. And that fall, I still remember, Amy Grant concert, Reunion Arena, Judy breaks up with me. That's the best thing that she did for me. I just have a Bible, and I've now learned too much to just quit on that. And then something just drew me to the book of Romans. And I took 2 weeks off from McDonald's, which is a lot for a young college student to do. All my vacation blown to read the book of Romans cover to cover. And somewhere during that 2-week time frame, it went from the head to the heart, and I just bowed down and accepted Jesus. My transformation that happened after accepting Jesus was no short of that same level of miracle. And this is where my family starts to notice. Their solution is to send me home. So I'm single, I don't have a girlfriend, I don't have any money, but at this point, I'm just totally in love with Jesus. So off I go to Pakistan. I have 20 Bibles in my bag, and I enter in, and for the first time, I never thought I would enter my home country with trepidation and fear. Everybody knew I had become an apostate, and they were persecuting my parents. You know what? This is where God became real, because you're no longer in the cocoon of Western Texas Bible Belt. When you're in Pakistan, where you have 250 million people and like 240 million of those are Muslim, it's very difficult. You feel like, this is where you need God. And so what I did was I had this little Gideon green Bible, and I would just go into the bathroom and do my quiet times. And every day, every time, God met me in His Word. Every problem I had, He had to answer. My parents, while they weren't convinced of Jesus, they were convinced that I had changed, and they couldn't deny that I had been transformed. And eventually, I ended up at Ernst & Young, a big global consulting firm. The more business success I had, the more I noticed they were more open to me. So I applied the principle of honor your mother and father. And you kept loving them, kept praying for them, kept praying for them. Over the years, you started to see a thawing out of the relationship, and my parents would call and say, hey, can you pray to Jesus about this? And then in 2017, I go back, and my mom seemed way more open, and I just felt like God was saying, ask the question. And I just was talking to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I'm just very fearful you're not going to be with me in heaven. And she's like, well, how can I be with you in heaven? And I said, you need to pray to Jesus. And we held hands, and she prayed with me to Jesus. I couldn't believe my ears, but my mom was praying to Christ. Her behavior started to change, and I just saw her be a completely different person. Yeah, so I really believe that God orchestrates things, and He brought me all the way from Pakistan to the States to introduce Himself to me, and discovering my birth identity and who raised me were all part of His grand plan. For those hopeless romantics that are going to be listening to this, okay, so Judy, she finally became convinced that I had actually changed, and then I felt like God was saying, you need to propose, so I proposed. She said yes eventually, so we got married. We had 4 beautiful kids. I learned the truth is that Jesus is love. I learned growing up about doing the right thing, following Allah through praying, fasting, reading the Quran. Those works are just hollow, and it didn't make me love. And when I found the truth in Jesus, I experienced God's love, and love so much that He would die for me. And nobody had told me that is the most important truth. And that was what was jumping out from that Bible ultimately, was love. My name is Ali. I'm from Pakistan, and this is how I found the truth.